Hey guys, after week 1, the landlady, I thought it'd be good to do a quick review of task 5. So, the first theme was deception. Appearances can be deceiving, and in the table you were asked to find evidence to support this and embed that evidence. So let's look at a good example from a student. This student has written, when Billy first arrives to the bed and breakfast, he peers through the window and sees a pretty little dachshund curled up asleep and a large parrot in the corner. He even comments on how animals were usually a good sign in a place like this. However, towards the end of the story, Billy realises that they are dead, and the landlord admits she stuffs all her little pets when they pass away. So why is this good? Well, first of all, it perfectly supports the claim. He sees animals, thinks, that's good, realises they're dead. A great example of appearances can be deceiving. It's only the necessary quotes. Look how short these phrases are. There are a few words here and there. A large parrot, 3 words. They're not these big long quotes. It's only what the student needed to support the claim. It's also enough context to understand. So if I hadn't read the story, I'd know exactly what a pretty little dachshund curled up asleep actually meant. It's Billy looking through the window of the bed and breakfast and seeing one. So whoever hasn't read the story can still understand what the words in red mean. And it makes sense as if it's one person. If you remove the quotation marks, it still reads as one sentence. For instance, when Billy first arrives at the bed and breakfast, he peers through the window and sees a pretty little dachshund and a large parrot in the corner. That makes sense as one sentence. It's grammatically correct, even though it's the student's words and the author's words together. Let's look at an example where the student could improve. Well, first of all, the quotes are way too long. You just need what you need to support the claim, not these big long quotes. Only take a few words here and there. Also, they're not embedded at all. It's the student has written one sentence and then the author has written 3 or 4 sentences. It should be a sentence with your words and the author's words together. This is what it means to embed. Let's look at another example. This was for theme 2, naivety and innocence. So this is another example from a different student. Billy, the protagonist, decides to stay at the bed and breakfast he comes across. Throughout his evening, there are various warnings to which Billy is very ignorant. He ignores them. He understands that his landlady appeared to be slightly off her rocker, but when he signs the guest book and sees only 2 other entries which are over 2 years old, Billy knows these names sound familiar, and he is not alarmed at how strange this is. There's a couple of little mistakes there, but overall very good. So why is it good? Well, it supports the claim. It shows an example of naivety and innocence. There's only the necessary quotes. Look at these 2, 3, 4 words here and there, not these big long quotes. It's enough context to understand. I know exactly what the red means. I know what's happening in the story. If I'd never read the story, I'd still understand what only 2 other entries means. And it makes sense, again, as if it's one person. Read it as one sentence. It's grammatically correct. Let's look at a student who could improve. It's repetitive. For instance, throughout the evening there are various warnings to which Billy is ignorant. He understands the landlady is a little crazy. His landlady appeared to be off her rocker. That's the same sentence said twice in 2 different ways. It's repetitive. They do it again. He only sees 2 other names from over 2 years ago, which sounds familiar. There were only 2 other entries. Billy says, I've heard those names before, and the landlady replies, this entry is 2 years old. It's repetitive. Also, they're not embedded again. It's still the student writes a sentence and then he puts the author's sentence immediately after. That's not embedded. The author's words and your words go together. So because of that, it feels like 2 different people are writing it. Let's look at a third example. This was for theme 3, an obsession with youth and beauty. This was my example. Once Billy Weaver decides to stay at the bed and breakfast, he settles down and sits with the landlady as they talk. During their conversation, she mentions his most beautiful teeth as being so white, unlike other guests that have stayed. She also talks about how the previous guest's skin was just like a baby, as there wasn't a blemish on him. This is an example of an obsession with youth and beauty. These perfectly white teeth, skin like a baby. There's only the necessary quotes. 3 words, 2 words, 5 words, 3 words. There's enough context to understand. If I hadn't read the story, I'd know that the guest, Billy, is sitting with his landlady and they're having a conversation about him and previous guests. It makes sense as one person. It's remove these quotation marks, it's grammatically correct as if one person wrote it. Let's look at a student who could improve. Now, this student has introduced their quotes. During their conversation, she says, his teeth weren't quite so white. You have the most beautiful teeth, Mr. Weaver. Don't you know that? There are lots of unnecessary words here. We only needed, she says, his teeth weren't quite so white, possibly, or she says that Billy had the most beautiful teeth. We only need the necessary words. Also, the dialogue in the narration is not necessary and not relevant and shouldn't be in there. Billy said, quoted from the author, and a what? Billy said, it shouldn't be in there. It doesn't belong. Again, it feels like two people are writing this. So whilst it is better, there is an introduction of the quotes, there's still a lot of unnecessary information and irrelevant information, and it still kind of feels like it's the author and the student as two separate people instead of mixing them together. Now, don't forget, please check the student website. There's the videos again, but there's also written explanations for everything. So you can go back and check, and I really encourage, if you scroll down, to look at the step-by-step guide, particularly reflect and correct. So please check this out. Thanks for watching, guys. You still have until Thursday at 10 p.m. if you want to make any changes. And do not forget task 6 and 7 and 8, please.